This is Sheffield, a city in the midst of massive redevelopment and the location for what's probably the biggest investigation into our industrial heritage ever undertaken by British archaeology. For the diggers, this is a hostile environment. Much of the ground's polluted and many of the trenches are on dangerous construction sites. Nevertheless, the archaeologists are building a picture of a city that's often been ignored by British history, but which was once the epicentre of Britain's Industrial Revolution. Today, a site like this can process 50,000 tonnes of steel a month. A century ago, it would have taken a whole city, a whole year to produce that much. And that city was Sheffield. The processes invented and developed here, combined with a highly skilled workforce, put it at the heart of Britain's industrial empire. At one time, nearly half of all Europe's steel was made in Sheffield.
But times have changed, and this heart has slowly stopped beating. Sheffield is remaking itself for the 21st century. And that massive regeneration means the archaeologists now have a unique and final chance to capture and record the heritage of the Steel City. In the last 6 years, units from across the country have dug over 50 sites in a bid to understand the industry and the people that made this city world famous. And at the forefront of that investigation are the archaeologists from Sheffield University's own unit, Arcus. In this special time team, we follow them as they unearth factories, workshops and houses, including 2 major sites at the heart of the city's industrial revolution.
People have this idea of the Industrial Revolution as being a very homogenous thing where everybody becomes dehumanised and works in factories. In a place like Sheffield, people very much carried on in the way they were working and negotiated the work on their own terms. And I think there's a very powerful message there for today, for how the city is reinventing itself.
But how does archaeology help us in telling Sheffield's story? You've already got maps and plans and paintings and sometimes even photos of the buildings.
The documents that we have didn't really discuss everyday life. They discussed the accounts of a building or the design of a building, and what we're trying to do is get to the individual experience of ordinary workers.
It may be a far cry from the archaeological glory of digging medieval cathedrals or the glamour of High Roman, but the enthusiasm of the diggers involved is beyond doubt.
To me, archaeology isn't nice bits of gold and emperors and kings and queens. It's about people, and this is where people worked.
It's quite exciting because you can actually see what's here, which makes a nice change. You can visualise it.
It's about as close you're going to get to time travelling, really, isn't it?
All these lovely features just shouting, jumping out at you. Just look at it, this is pure sex. I mean, you can't get away from it.
I really like the people who are doing this archaeology.
Yeah.
It's just not an indulgence, is it? It's so rooted in the city.
See, that surprises me because you're never normally very keen on industrial archaeology or the later period.
Oh, I think the archaeology is totally boring. It's the people. It's the people. No, that's not quite fair. I can see that rediscovering what people used to do is very exciting. Yeah. But once you get buildings which are specifically built in order to maximise profit, then the kind of archaeology that you get is no longer reflecting human beings. It's like these square buildings.
I think it is, you see, because the archaeology of this period is, to me, more relevant, say, than a lot of early prehistory. This seems to connect very directly with sort of families today, and I think that's important.
The archaeology already uncovered around Sheffield paints a picture of a city absolutely crammed with the fire and steel that drove the Industrial Revolution.
We have the steel furnace down there. We have another large furnace over here. So this would have been black, thick with smoke and smelly as well.
Are you saying that this factory ended here and another one started here?
Absolutely, yes.
There must have been an incredible feeling of claustrophobia around here.
Yes, well, I imagine it wasn't a particularly great place to work.
It wasn't always like this. Sheffield was for centuries a rural backwater. But circumstances meant it was destined to become one of the most important industrial cities in the world.
Sheffield didn't really have a Roman presence and was only a very small medieval town. The story of Sheffield really goes back only about 250 years. From the 17th century, there were lots of people in the hinterland of Sheffield, in the area known as Hallamshire, that worked with metals. Mostly they made things like scythes and some knives. But Sheffield had the key advantage of having lots of water power. There are 5 rivers that feed into Sheffield. It also had grit in the Peak District for making millstones out, and it had coal measures. And so if you put all those things together and add the skill of metalworking, you've got the basis for an industry.
And this is where that industry really took off. In the mid-1760s, this 9-acre site near the city centre became home to John Marshall, one of the earliest mass producers of steel in Sheffield. And it was in factories like this that these furnaces changed Sheffield forever.
It's hard to believe that these few ruins are all that's left of something that was once the epicentre of Sheffield's steel industry, isn't it?
It is, well, not really if you know what they are.
All right, well, what are they?
Well, what we've got here is the remains of cementation furnaces. They're quite special. There used to be 260 of these in Sheffield alone. Now there's only 4 left above the ground in the whole of Britain.
Cementation, the basic process that converts iron into steel, actually originated in Germany. But it was Sheffield's unique resources that turned it into the basis of a world-beating industry. It's one of many techniques and skills now lost to history. But in a bid to understand what made the city so special, Phil will have to resurrect some of them as he attempts to make a hunting knife using only materials and methods used during the Industrial Revolution.
A bit rusty, isn't it?
Yeah, this was excavated a few months ago.
So how old's this then?
It's possibly late 18th, early to mid 19th century.
This is genuine.
Yeah, it's the real
18th,
McCoy.
19th century iron.
Yeah.
And we're starting with cementation,
into small
the process
pieces
of combining
and remelt
iron
it
and
in a
carbon
crucible.
to produce steel.
And what we do is fill the chest with charcoal, and then we'll basically cook it in a furnace for 5 days at 1100 degrees Celsius. And what will happen is the carbon from the charcoal slowly soak into the iron and convert it into steel.
But it's been a long time since any steel has been converted like this.
The last conversion happened in 1951, I think it was.
This is the famous Sheffield technology. This is what made the city so famous. And you're saying nobody knows how to do it then?
No.
So that wants to go straight in there?
Yep, quite far back.
We're only converting a few kilos of iron.
Right, and in 5 days we'll have steel.
Yes, fingers crossed we will.
But the cementation furnaces at Marshall's could produce between 6 and 20 tons of steel at a time.
One man would have stood in here, and there would have been a little hatch up at about this height, and he would pass his iron bars through. They'd be about 12 foot long, something like that. And then on here, we'd have a large sandstone chest, and they'd be loaded up, a layer of charcoal at the bottom, then your layer of iron bars, then another layer of charcoal, iron bars, until it's full. So the fire comes up through here, and then down these flues, up along here, wraps around the chests which sit on this place. And if you can imagine, this structure had a big cone on top of it as well, so that acted as a reverberatory furnace, so the flames would be battered back down onto the top of it, and then they burnt it for a period of about 2 to 3 weeks.
For the steel workers, this process was a hot, dangerous and backbreaking job. But the technology used at this site brought industrial glory and wealth to the city. The dig at Marshall's is starting to wind down, but the archaeologists are already busy at work on their next major commission at a site 2 miles away. This is Wisewood, now the building site for a sheltered accommodation project. This was once the location of a forge and grinding workshop. It's also a site that bore the full brunt of the worst man-made disaster ever to hit Britain. A disaster that almost wiped out Sheffield in its industrial prime.
If you're enjoying this episode, join us as a Patreon member today.
The massive redevelopment of Sheffield means that at any one time, archaeologists are investigating up to 5 sites around the city, from foundries that produced the steel to the workshops that processed it. But the dig on the remains of Wisewood Forge has a special significance for the team from Sheffield University. The forge is downstream from the Bradfield Dam, and it was among the first casualties of the worst man-made disaster in British history.
On the evening of the 11th of March 1864, one of the navvies was leaving the site and noticed a crack appearing in the front of this dam. But he thought there was something up and got the chief engineer of the waterworks out to the site. And he was actually clambering over the face of the dam, and the thing gave, and he managed to leap to safety. 650 million gallons of water were unleashed, and over a course of about 8 miles actually swept into the town. It destroyed about 400 houses, 100 factories, and about 250 people were killed by it. The closest that any English city has come to being engulfed by a tidal wave.
As Carenza found, diary entries and eyewitness reports now kept in the Sheffield archive paint a vivid picture of the destruction.
Terrible news of a great flood in the Don Valley. The new reservoir at Bradfield has burst. In the streets of Sheffield, the debris is piled up to 8 to 10 feet high, and among it is found fragments of furniture and many dead bodies. Gibraltar Street, Spring Street, Corporation Street, Bridge Street and the surrounding neighbourhood are one sheet of water. Great numbers of men are now engaged getting dead bodies out of houses where they've been drowned in bed.
Wisewood was hit hard by the torrent, but the archaeologists expect to find more than just flood damage on the site. This could be a complex dig. Maps show there have been buildings on this site for 230 years, but what happened inside them during that time is unclear. The diggers have given themselves 2 targets. Firstly, this southern building, which according to records was completely destroyed by the 1864 flood, but photographs show it in use as a forge in the early 1900s. And then there's the northern building, which is even more of a mystery. It survived the flood, but there's very little information on what it was used for.
Once they get below that floor, we're hoping that the deposits the evaluation revealed will be exposed and tell us a lot more about that building's history.
But there's a catch. The developers want to get onto the site as soon as possible. So the team will have to persuade Diana Sach, who's monitoring their work for Sheffield City Council, that they need more time than the initial 3 weeks they've been allocated.
If there is stuff underneath there after the next 2 or 3 weeks, it could be another month at least on the excavation of
Well,
this
it's quite a big area, and unless it turns out that there's more areas of disturbance from later 20th century activity than was revealed in the evaluation, you have indeed got quite a lot of archaeology there to have a look at.
But more digging time means that work on the development will have to wait, and the owner of Wisewood, Julian Kendall, has become increasingly frustrated by the delays to his building schedule.
The bureaucracy that is involved in getting to this stage, which is having your archaeologists scratching away down there, is huge and so slow. And in my experience, is a desperately under-resourced. I mean, the woman that heads it up, Diana Sach, she has 2 other people working with her, and they're responsible for the whole of South Yorkshire. So, any archaeological interest going on in this area has to go through them. Well, if that isn't a bottleneck on development, then what is?
In a city that's effectively one massive archaeological dig, it's vital for the archaeologists to maintain a good working relationship with developers, no matter what their attitude is to the dig.
How do you find dealing with the developers these days about this? Because in the old days it used to be very difficult.
Some developers see it as a positive thing. They can see that if it's a large company, they can get good PR out of it.
Yeah.
Others don't want to know. And in fact, at Wisewood Forge, Julian Kendall, the developer there, is a very pleasant man, but he sees it as a tax. He's got to pay it, he's taxed. He's not interested, really, but he just says, I'll do it, because that'll enable me to get my planning permission, and that's what I want.
The time limit facing the diggers at Wisewood could be a problem. There's potentially a lot of archaeology to unpick in just 3 weeks. The steel that was forged and worked at Wisewood would have come from one of the many foundries in Sheffield. One of the most influential being the groundbreaking Marshall Steelworks 2 miles away in the city centre. Now, after 4 years and 17 trenches, site director Andy Lines is winding that dig down.
What you can see in front of you is lots of brick walls, lots of stone slab floors, and essentially we've got 9 phases of activity all crammed into this little area.
He now has to construct a story of what happened here during the Industrial Revolution using the evidence he's uncovered.
We do find an awful lot of what you'd call domestic wares, tablewares, that you wouldn't necessarily expect to find on a site like this. What we think of now as a purely industrial concern might also have been somebody's house, so there isn't quite that separation between industrial and domestic. And indeed, we've got plans of this site as far up as 1896 that show rows of terraced houses right next to the factories with the large chimneys belching out smoke.
What are your favourite finds?
Now, this is a commemorative token that was issued between 1795 and 97, and it says, "Earl Grey, the noble supporter of reform and patriotic defender of people's rights." It gives us an insight into the political nature of the people working in these sites. You know, they were aware of political ideas and activism at the time. One of our other finds on this site is a gold guinea.
Oh wow, that's a proper find, isn't it?
Now that's a real find there.
Wow.
And just look at the condition of that as well. It's a 4th issue George III from 1775, and it came out the ground that shiny.
So somebody could have picked up their week's pay
Yep,
and lost it even before they got home.
absolutely. You know, it's quite gutting, really.
The Marshall site that Andy's been digging was once at the forefront of steel production in Sheffield. And in a bid to understand what happened here, we've been trying to replicate some of the processes used during the Industrial Revolution. A week ago, we sealed 19th century iron in a box of carbon and put it in a furnace at 1100 degrees Celsius in an attempt to produce the raw steel with which to make a hunting knife. It's the first time that this process has been tried for 50 years. And if it's worked, the metal should be covered in so-called blisters, small surface bubbles that indicate the iron has been converted into steel.
If there are no blisters, it possibly hasn't converted it into steel, but I can just see one there.
But the only way to know if the steel has the right amount of carbon in it is to use the 19th century version of materials analysis.
So all I do is belt it?
Yeah, really hard. Yes!
Done it. So what do you learn from that?
Right, the crystals down this end are very, very fine. And as they go into the centre, they get coarser.
Yeah, this is more sort of glistening. This glistens more.
Yeah.
So the experiment has worked?
Yeah.
But at the moment, the quality of the steel varies throughout the bar, with a hard but brittle layer around the outside and a more flexible but softer metal in the middle. The next stage is to mix those different steels together by melting the bar in a crucible and then pouring it into an ingot, giving us a steel bar with the same qualities throughout. It's a simple enough concept, but like so many of the techniques in Phil's challenge, it's not that straightforward, as we're having to rely on skills and technology that have all but disappeared.
How long is it going to take?
Well, we're suggesting 2 to 3 hours. But in all honesty, we don't really know, because in this day and age we're used to pressing buttons, not lighting fires.
What sort of temperature are we going to have to get up to?
Well, 1600 centigrade, that's a nice optimum temperature.
And that will then melt the steel?
It will be melted with about 50 degrees of superheat, which gives us time to take it out, do whatever's necessary and pour. Right, it's just a question of waiting now.
But time hasn't been a luxury for the Archaeologists diggers busily working away at the Wisewood site on the outskirts of the city. They now have only a few days left of their 3-week dig, but they may just have made a breakthrough in the northern building. They still haven't found any evidence of the devastating 1864 flood, but they are starting to uncover remains from a much earlier 1700s build of the works.
We're looking at probably pre-19th century structure, and we think we're picking up slots for possibly sort of grinding wheels.
The discovery of remains dating from before the flood has persuaded South Yorkshire's principal archaeologist Diana Sach that the team need more time if they're going to tell the full story of Wisewood Forge.
Yeah, I would quite like to know what these are.
I'd quite like to know what these are.
Yes.
With Dinah's backing, the diggers are given another 4 weeks to unpick the archaeology. But that's the maximum they're allowed before the site has to be handed over to the developer and the bulldozers.
So how's it going, Alan?
Well, we're up to about 1400, Phil, but we're not just getting over the top. We're going to need another 150 degrees of heat.
Is it actually still heating up?
It seems to have stabilised. It seems to have been at this temperature for a long time now. That's why I'm a little bit concerned.
Do you know what you can do to try and increase it just to get those extra few degrees?
We can put some recarburising iron in and some silicon, but it's cheating.
We're now looking at a point where we are saying, are we actually going to do it at all?
Our only hope now is to try and artificially lower the melting point of the steel, because we just can't get any more heat out of this furnace.
It's sort of like a votive offering, really, isn't it?
There were once over 2,000 of these crucible furnaces in use around Sheffield. Now all that remains are broken fragments of a method that helped make the city world famous.
Oh, whatever's this?
This is the base of a crucible vessel.
And this stuff here is what you're left with inside?
Yes, the sort of the slag.
And during his 4-year dig at the Marshall site in the city centre, Andy believes he may have discovered one of the earliest versions of a crucible furnace.
This part of the furnace would have been below ground level, and if we come over this side, we can actually see into it. What we've got here is basically an awful lot of spent fuel, lots of bits of coke. If you have a look at that, it looks similar to stuff that you'd get off your barbecue. This is built out of normal bricks, isn't it?
And now, as part of his research, he's looking at the furnace Phil's using, one of only 2 working models remaining.
What we normally see is structures that are severely truncated, i.e., they'll be cut off to this level, if we're lucky, about that level, occasionally just the odd brick in the ground. So here, it enables us to actually visualise the whole complex in 3D. What we've got looks a bit like this, so can we say it's a crucible furnace, can we not? And we come to a decision, and in this case, I think that we probably have got enough evidence here to say that the cellar probably was a crucible cellar.
Okay, Alan, your time's up. You're going to have another look in there. Now, according to the script, there's supposed to be molten steel in there. Is this normal?
No.
No?
I can't say, Phil, it hasn't molten. You can tell
It
the
hasn't.
colour.
Well, you disappointed? I am.
We're so close. I mean, we must have been up to 1450 centigrade. We needed another 50 or so, and we'd have been there.
Do you think the furnace is up to the job?
History's proved it, hasn't it? So, yes.
Experience. This is the first time you've done it in how long?
A long quarter of a century at least.
So we're desperately short of experience.
Yeah.
And Rod, you're like me, you've never even seen this process work. I mean, you were obviously putting a lot on seeing it work.
Yeah, we'd spent about 3 weeks making the blister steel, so I'm a bit gutted.
A bit gutted. Not been a good day.
No.
With so much work already invested in this project, we can't let it fail at this stage. And that means resorting to modern methods and using Sheffield University's state-of-the-art furnace to reclaim our steel before casting it into an ingot. But steel production was just one half of Sheffield's success story. The other was knife making.
There's one here actually, and it's attached to a handle. still.
And right across the city, archaeologists are also concentrating on the people who made the cutlery. Over at Wisewood, the diggers are now uncovering clear evidence of the grinders, the elite bunch of craftsmen who risked life and limb sharpening blades that were exported worldwide. While in the centre of the city, Jim's preparing to investigate a fascinating series of workshops belonging to Little Mesters, self-employed artisans who fashioned many of the products synonymous with the Steel City.
What's this wreckage?
This is the remains of Morton's cutlery works.
Well, it doesn't look like a cutlery works, it looks like a series of houses.
Well, it's very typical for Sheffield. It's essentially just a series of rooms ranged around a courtyard, and people would rent individual rooms to ply their trades.
So this is the first step on the road to big factory mass production?
Yeah, this is early 19th century, about 1818, 1820, that sort of date.
But the results of this quick surgical dig surprise everyone, as the archaeologists discover evidence of a trade now banned throughout the world.
If you love Time Team, become a Time Team member today. Your membership helps to fund new digs and new episodes. Plus, you'll get ad-free viewing, behind-the-scenes access, and much more.
The annual Cutler's Feast is a chance for the great and the good of Sheffield to revel in the city's rich industrial heritage.
Pray silence and grace by the Bishop of Sheffield.
And perhaps even to increase the fortunes of some of its current workforce.
And we pray particularly for the success of Sheffield United and the recovery of Sheffield Wednesday.
This formal splendour is a million miles away from the conditions in the archaeological trenches dotted around the city.
It's going to be great in this temperature, isn't it?
Many of the sites are heavily polluted, and that means protective clothing, even in temperatures of 30 degrees Celsius.
I reckon I'll sweat a bucket in here.
Come on, Lala.
While the centuries of rubble and industrial detritus take their toll on even the fittest of diggers.
It's getting harder as the years go on, even though I'm not that old, I must admit.
You're only 23.
I know.
You're suffering already.
Suffering already. My knees are quite bad, my back's quite bad.
And then there are the modern urban dangers.
We had to spend the first couple of hours collecting syringes and hypodermics from around the site.
But the finds can be worth the effort, even if, like those discovered on the site of the old Morton's cutlery works, they don't immediately spring to mind when you think of industrial archaeology.
Jim, these are spectacular. What are they?
They're elephant tusks. I think they're African elephants.
Whatever were they doing in the basement of a Sheffield house?
Why they were left behind there, I don't know, but they would certainly have been used for raw material for things like knife handles.
Would the cutlers have used anything else for their handles other than ivory?
Oh, definitely. They would have used anything that they could get their hands on which would carve nicely and take markings, and we've got a selection of different species that would have been used. Probably the most popular after elephant ivory was probably hippo, which so we've got large hippo incisors that stick out there, and then these more curved ones, which are presumably less popular with the cutlers because you can't get a nice straight run out of them.
In fact, it would seem almost anything was game for the handle makers. Warthog, wild boar, even whale's teeth.
You get the impression that they're combing the world, presumably combing the British Empire for potential material for handles. And I suppose our tendency is to concentrate on the blades and the steel and the metal, but this is equally important.
Presumably to a person in the 19th century that just would have looked ordinary, but to us it really looks quite obscene.
Yeah.
But is there a moral issue when archaeologists come up with such valuable stuff?
I don't think there can be really, because we'd then be putting our sort of modern judgment onto something that's gone on in the past. It was different then. They didn't have the same sort of view about it, so you've just got to accept the archaeological evidence, I think.
These finds are in the minority. The very nature of industrial archaeology means most discoveries are rather abstract remains of machinery, like these plinths from another of the sites that once held rolling equipment.
What are these things here? You've got what look like bases,
yes,
and then big bolts in them?
Yes, yeah. These are machine bases which we think probably held rolling machinery. the bolts, you can see they've actually been splashed with lead around the side, and this was supposedly to keep them watertight, but obviously what they didn't know is that the lead actually can sort of corrode the metalwork, so it probably did them more damage in the long run.
So these are big machines?
Yes, absolutely.
Just how big and dangerous Phil is about to discover, because a rolling mill is the next location for our attempt to make a knife using the methods available during the Industrial Revolution. In a few moments, our single rod of brittle crucible steel will be repeatedly rolled, like these ones, under immense pressure, transforming it into a stronger, more flexible metal that's perfect for knife making. But the easy choreography of the rolling team is deceptive.
Just how dangerous is this?
Can be very dangerous.
The metal is fantastically hot, over 1,000 degrees Celsius, and these rollers are lethal.
I've seen it drag people along the floor and all.
So all I got to do is let go.
Is he going to get them? Well, I'll pay it.
Come in.
I'll leave it. That's it. Go on. I'll pay it.
Don't give up your day job.
This is as authentic as it gets. These rollers have been in use since the late 19th century, and judging by the finds at the Wisewood dig, the tools haven't changed either.
This is stuff that we've found throughout the entire site.
Right.
Associated with both the forge and probably the rolling mills as well. There's different kinds of tongs, longer ones for getting ingots out of the forge.
And what about this thing that looks like a sort of spade or...?
Yeah, it's far too heavy to be a spade, though. I mean,
oh, right,
feel the weight on it.
Yes, yes.
There's obviously quite strong blokes working in the forge, but it could be, it looks like for getting pizzas out of ovens, but maybe it was for getting ingots out of ovens as well.
At the rolling mill, it's time to process our archaeological steel. But the expert eyes of the team have spotted the problem.
It's gone, that. Gone.
So, is it work okay?
Well, it's gone. It's all cracked up.
Oh, it's no good?
No. Yeah, it's just ripped it. It's torn it.
These gouges mean there are cracks throughout the steel, making it useless. We now face a horrible choice. Do we start the experiment all over again? Or even worse, do we just give up?
We were gutted when we didn't get the crucible steel. Then we salvaged it and we were pleased. And now, back to square one, we've lost it. I'm gutted, I really am.
But there could be a chance.
That bit's all right, is it?
There may just be a couple of inches free from fracture.
I don't think it's going to be a Bowie knife, it's going to be a pocket knife, isn't it?
It's now down to the rolling team's 100 plus years of combined experience to save the steel and our experiment.
What do you reckon?
That's not too bad, actually. We'll chop it into 3 pieces and roll them again.
Brilliant.
Okay.
You must have a hell of a lot of appreciation for the skills they got.
Definitely. I'm pleased that the lads here have managed to salvage some of the ingot that we made, and I think it says a lot about the skills that they had back in the 17th, 18th, 19th century.
At Wisewood, the archaeologists are coming to the end of their 7-week investigation, and they've now built up a comprehensive picture of the site's development. It now seems the southern building contained a forge before and after the 1864 flood, while the diggers have untangled the history of the mysterious northern building.
The earliest use of the site was the grinding wheels themselves. Then that was covered over with a lot of clinker, and then a really, really nicely laid stone cobbled floor put on top of that, which was probably some kind of workshop.
Right.
And then concrete on top of that was the
the
latest
concrete
phase.
we can see at the back. Mm-hmm. That's a cracking sequence, isn't it, really?
It's a beauty.
But what's missing from this site is any physical trace of the flood that completely destroyed the southern building.
We've got evidence that there were 2 builds either side of a massive destruction, which we're pretty sure was the flood.
So you haven't got silting and debris, but you've got a rebuilding as a result of it.
But as Carenzas discovered, there could be a clue to this lack of flood evidence in the insurance records for the time. The claims for physical injury and death were treated somewhat harshly, such as the case of an artisan who was killed leaving a wife and 7 children.
The 12-year-old son is actually given less money than his 10-year-old sister, presumably because at 12 years old he's regarded as capable of going out and earning enough for himself.
And yet the claims for businesses were much more successful.
Here we have William Ibbotson Horn, the lessee and occupier of Wisewood Works and land and premises adjoining it. His initial claim, you see, was for nearly £11,000, and he's granted £8,750, which is quite a substantial proportion of it.
It would seem that William Ibbotson Horn, the tenant of Wisewood, was so successful in his claim that after the devastation of the flood, he could afford to thoroughly clean up the site and rebuild his factory as quickly as possible, leaving the new southern building as the only clue as to what happened here in the early hours of the 12th of March 1864. The Wisewood dig is almost finished, and the archaeologists have now only a few days before the bulldozers move in. But the digs taking place around this city can only tell part of the Sheffield story. To get the full picture of the city's industrial heritage, the archaeologists are also using the vast range of historical resources at their disposal. The City Archive catalogues the transformation of the city from the birth of the Industrial Revolution.
Marshall's works in the 1760s and 70s was down there on the edge of the down.
Through to its heyday in the late 19th century, when insurance companies kept detailed plans of the factories they were covering against fire. Then there's the work of Sheffield University's architecture department, who've recreated a snapshot of the city as it was in 1900, with detailed reconstructions of every factory, forge and workshop.
It's an interesting approach to build a model of a place.
There's no such thing as a nowhere site.
Yeah.
Every site has a history.
Yeah.
And the buildings of the period that are still standing also have their own stories to tell.
That's probably one of the earlier windows on that wall, the one with the bars in. They wanted to let a lot of heat and noise out, but also they wanted to keep the workers in. They didn't want anyone to escape. You were there for your day's work and you did it.
And finally, there's a unique resource of the city's skills, collected over 60 years by one man, Ken Hawley.
We've got monkey saws and back saws, tenon saws, virtually every saw that's been made, we've got it.
These are more than just physical remains of Sheffield's Industrial Revolution. They're a record of the processes and techniques that gave the city a reputation for quality and efficiency.
We've got this very clever hammer here. Now watch, if I do that to hit it, and I want to go the other way, I spin it in my hand, like that, on the upstroke, and it comes down the other way. Good God. Think of the time that saved.
In fact, this archive is felt to be so important that some of it is now on display in the city.
This is all beautifully laid out, and it's quite interesting, but quite frankly, I know how you make stuff. I know the tools that they would have used.
Yeah, you do now, but what about in the future?
We'll still have the recordings of them, the papers of them, the photos. This television program.
Yeah, but you see, I think that's all very ephemeral. We don't know that electronic stuff's going to survive. We don't know that computer stuff's going to survive, and so on. I mean, we already have the situation that the 900th anniversary of Doomsday Book in 1986. Most of the discs that had the data on that we can't read now because computers have moved on. So they're not a very reliable source. To have the physical tools is going to be much better. This will become more and more valuable as an archaeological archive. So I think Hawley deserves a hell of a lot of credit for gathering all this together, you know.
The next stage in our knife-making process is to forge the metal into a basic shape. But as Phil discovers, there's more to it than just whacking it with a hammer.
So that goes on there, and then just keep. See, you make it look so easy, and no doubt I make it look so ham-fisted. It's bent.
What are we going to do with that now?
I'm sure you'll think of something.
This is where the skill of steel production gives way to the craft of knife making, the other trade that made Sheffield world famous. And the archaeological shadows of the process can be found throughout the city.
These are sort of hammer scale deposits. You get little sparks flying off constantly. It looks a little bit like steel confetti.
But the most dangerous job belonged to the grinders, and at Wisewood the diggers have just finished uncovering some fantastically preserved 18th century examples of the most lethal trade in Sheffield.
The grinding wheels were placed in the troughs on that side and on that side just behind you.
Right. Originally powered by water wheels and later by steam, the grindstones would revolve at up to 600 revolutions per minute. But the stone from which they were made was often impure. Pay for a grinder was good, but life expectancy was short.
If there was a fault in the wheel, what had been cut from the quarry, they didn't know, and it would explode, and it would send them up.
I mean, literally would blow to pieces.
If it didn't damage their hips, it would throw them, you know, it could kill them quite easily. Yeah. Yeah.
No wonder they got well paid.
Yeah, that was dangerous.
It's becoming clear that every stage of making this knife is fraught with danger or the threat of failure.
Like that? Yeah, you're watching your sparks, you have to lift it as well.
Is that alright?
Yeah, I don't know till I have a look. That's not bad at all.
That thing is very dangerous.
It can be evil.
And I mean, you cannot, in all honesty, sit here and not have a lot of respect for that.
Everything. Total concentration.
But no one was safe from the effects of living in a heavy industrial town. And the graveyards and archaeology department are full of evidence of short, brutal lives.
If you're enjoying this dig, why not take it one step further and become a Time Team member? It's your front row seat to the greatest show on earth and under it. Become a Time Team member today and help us keep the archaeology coming.
Sheffield is a city built on the industry of steelmaking, and the redevelopment of the city has allowed archaeologists to uncover great swathes of this industrial bedrock. But the sheer scale of the investigation into the city's past is also allowing the archaeologists to uncover the harsh reality of life and death at the very heart of the Industrial Revolution.
What do you think the people were like who worked here?
I think they would have been covered in soot quite a lot. You know, it was a hard job working in the steel industry. It's not something you can look back on with rose-tinted spectacles. It wouldn't have been a very nice place to work at all.
Skeletons excavated as part of another redevelopment show a city rife with disease.
If you look at the inner surface of the rib,
all that sort of honeycombing,
it's quite likely this relates to tuberculosis, and this child contracted syphilis from its mother at the time it was born.
And then there are bodies broken by industry.
This is the femur, the bone, the major bone of the thigh, and it takes a considerable amount of force to break that bone.
So do you think, is that a heavy weight falling on the leg?
Yes, this is more typical of the modern era, high velocity, vehicles moving around, large weights perhaps landing on someone's leg. But look, it's healed together, but not in alignment. And this has caused, of course, an awkward gait, a limp in effect.
Injuries like this were particularly common in the cutlery trade. And that's the stage Phil's reached in his attempt to make a hunting knife using the inherited skills of Sheffield.
We're going to put a brass guard with a rosewood handle.
He's now in the hands of Reg Cooper, one of the few remaining independent craftsmen still working in the city.
We've got to do a lot of filing, a lot of linishing, and a lot of polishing.
It's incredible. I mean, we've already put so much work just into getting the blade, and then we're going to have to do equally an enormous amount of work just to put that handle on.
Oh, we're only just starting, Phil.
Come on, get on with it.
God's sake, don't let me ruin this.
We've got two buildings here, and this one seems to have been a grinding workshop, or what's called the grinding hole.
At Wisewood, the diggers are now handing the site over to developer Julian Kendall, who can finally start building his sheltered accommodation.
Obviously, to build it safely, they've got to put new foundations in. So as I understand it, the vast majority of this lot will disappear on Monday.
Within days, the Wisewood site's cleared and the new building's foundations are laid. All that's left now is the report writing stage. But some archaeology has survived at the revolutionary Marshall steelworks site, where the developer has agreed to pay for the permanent display of one of the furnaces.
So what's the story of the site that you want to tell in this report?
I think the story of the site basically reflects how Sheffield has developed. I mean, the earliest feature we know about on the site was the town corn mill, which was founded in the 12th century. All this was fields and orchards, and it remained that way for several hundred years. And then we get Marshalls built in that corner. That's the signal for industrialisation. And when Marshall starts to expand, everyone starts building on this little plot of land. We start to see workshops spring up, and then it expands and Sheffield grows as all the other works come online. So, I mean, what we've got here really is Sheffield in a microcosm.
The knife we've been making is also, in a small way, a microcosm of the processes and determination that fueled the city's industrial revolution. It's taken the skill of 6 trades, 15 craftsmen, and 250 years of tradition to transform a lump of 19th century iron into a thing of beauty.
Just such an incredible achievement. I think we've got every reason to be proud of it, haven't we?
We certainly have, Phil.
The Marshalls and Wisewood sites may have finished, but Sheffield's ongoing redevelopment means the City Council's archaeologists are continually identifying new sites. So the Arcus team still have years of digging ahead of them.
What about the timetable? Because you say we're going to start next Monday. Have you got a team together yet?
No.
We haven't. So
No.
we've got to find some people quick.
Yeah.
But the work already done here has given archaeologists a new approach to investigating the country's industrial past.
We found out amazing things about the way they were making metals, and by analysing the slag and in fact, there's a lot of lost knowledge there. There were some very skilled techniques going on, and that's one thing we're trying to say, is that actually these people were very skilled.
The glory days of industrial Sheffield are now gone. But as it transforms itself for the 21st century, the work of the archaeologists involved means the Steel City will now have a comprehensive and vital record of its heritage. But more than that, the personal commitment of the diggers to the story of their city has redefined our whole attitude to industrial archaeology.
I think you've just got to forget the term industrial. You know, it's got a lot of baggage that comes with it. You've got to look at it as historical archaeology. It's the same as other archaeology. It's about the people. How did these people live their lives? What material did they surround themselves with? What was their experience like? You know, and in that respect, it's absolutely no different.
Join Time Team on Patreon to access exclusive 3D models, masterclasses, and behind-the-scenes insights.